After 26 years of the outstanding service, Dr. Chu retired from Ohio State in 1995, but he continued teaching as a business professor at the number of colleges and university. He was the Danforth Fellow and served as president of the Midwest Conference on Asian Affairs. Well known for his scholarship, Dr. Chu published the monograph, Reformer in Modern China, Chang-Xiang, 1965, co-edited two books, Li Hongchang and China's Early Modernization, 1997, and Madame Chiang Kai-shek and Her China, 2005, and also he wrote a host of professional and academic articles. Beyond academia, Dr. Chu had numerous interests. He was an avid tennis player and sports fan, and of course with a special fondness for the Buckeyes. He was married to Lucy, a highly regarded musician and a music educator for over 50 years. Together, they raised three children, Elaine, and Lola, and Jonathan, and they have been blessed with the 5 grandchildren. The Samuel C. Chu Memorial Lecture Series is the fitting testament to Dr. Chu's legacy as a scholar, educator, administrator, and family man. So on behalf of the Ohio State community, I'd like to extend a deep and sincere thanks to Mrs. Lucy Chu and her family for the gift that made today's lecture and future lectures possible. Thank you. We are committed to arranging a series of stellar lectures that will reflect well on Dr. Chu's memory. So now, I'd like to turn the program over to Department of History Chair, Dr. Scott Levi.
Thank you very much, Professor Yuasa. I would, of course, like to echo the sentiments of thanks to Lucy and her family for their generosity, which enabled us to endow the Chu Lecture, now in its 6th year. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Seung-kyung, Korea Foundation Professor in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures, and Director of the Institute for Korean Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. Professor Kim received her BA in Sociology from Seoul, Korea's Yonsei University in 1977. She continued her studies here in the United States, receiving her MA in Anthropology from Hunter College in 1986, and her PhD in Anthropology from the City University of New York in 1990. Prior to joining the faculty at Indiana University in 2015, Seung-kyung served as chair of the Department of Women's Studies, my condolences, and director of the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of Maryland, where she also served as acting associate dean for the College of Arts and Humanities. Seung-kyung's impressive body of scholarship engages a number of important historical themes. These include the participation of women in social movements, both as workers and in relation to the state, the process of transnational migration in the context of globalization, and the experiences of families in that process, especially with regard to education, and feminist theories of social change. Among her many publications, she's the author of 2 books, The Korean Woman's Movement and the State, Bargaining for Change, and also Class Struggle or Family Struggle, Lives of Women Factory Workers in South Korea. The 4th edition of her highly influential co-edited volume, Feminist Theory Reader, Local and Global Perspectives, challenges readers to rethink the complex meanings of difference outside of contemporary Western feminist contexts. Instead turns readers' attention to current debates about violence against women, sex work, care work, trans feminisms, and post-feminisms. Suzanne Bergeron of the University of Michigan writes, "This anthology is the place to begin a course on feminist theories." Besides numerous journal articles and book chapters, Professor Kim lectures frequently around the globe. Professor Kim's current project is The Making of Global Citizens, Transnational Migration and Education in Kairogi Families, a book that she's co-authored with John Finch, who is conveniently right here. We're deeply honored to have Professor Kim with us today to deliver her talk, South Korean Millennials Military Service and Neoliberal Calculations. So please join me in welcoming Professor Seung-kyung Kim as the 2019 Samuel C. Chu Memorial Lecturer in East Asian Studies.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Levi, for the warm welcome. And I would like to thank the Department of History for inviting me to deliver the 2019 Samuel C. Chu Lecture in East Asian Studies. The research project that I will present today is part of a 5-year global lab project entitled Korean Millennials, Coming of Age in an Era of Inequality. And I am one of the 5 members, and 4 are all in quantitative sociology and economics, and I'm the only qualitative researcher in this project. And somebody asked me today, how come you became interested in military, South Korean military? And part of the reason why we became interested in this project has to do with the current project that we're working on about global migration, transnational migration, and education. The students that we have interviewed in the US who came from Korea, many of them had to go back to Korea to do military service. And they were talking about the kind of worries and what will happen to them, what will happen to their career, all those things. So we became interested in what is going on with the South Korean military. Of course, I knew about South Korean military is a place where young Korean, and I put all able-bodied men, have to go through at least 2 years now. So that became part of the reason why I started to work on this. And of course, like Professor Levi said, that it is co-authored with my partner, Dr. John Finch, who is in the same department of East Asian Languages and Cultures at Indiana University. In the opening decades of the new millennium, 3 highly publicized incidents at military posts near the DMZ drew national attention to bullying and other toxic aspects of military culture. On June 19, 2005, a 22-year-old private tossed a grenade and opened fire, killing 8 soldiers at his guard post in an outburst brought on by sustained hazing by his superiors. On April 7, 2014, a soldier died from beating suffered from in a month of physical and mental abuse by 5 higher-ranking soldiers. Lastly, on June 21st, 2014, another soldier went on a shooting rampage and killed 5 of his colleagues in an incident that he claimed was brought on by bullying. The media recognized these incidents as structural issues brought on by systematic problems within military culture. Public opinion demanded reforms, and the Army Chief of Staff had to resign. Okay, now I know how to use this. Mandatory military service has been an inescapable fact of life for young men in South Korea from the time of the Korean War to the present. The country currently maintains one of the world's largest military forces, many of which are stationed along the ironically named demilitarized zone in order to protect the country from the even larger military forces of North Korea in one of the few locations where the Cold War has never ended. Military conscription is deeply unpopular in South Korea. The fact that young men are required to serve in the military or face imprisonment seems strikingly at odds with the neoliberal values of market competition, individual freedom, and meritocracy that have become pervasive in all aspects of South Korean life in the years following the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Despite its reliance on conscription to recruit its personnel, the South Korean military has begun making changes that allow more freedom to its soldiers and seek to make the military experience less onerous. These reforms include requiring less time from conscripts and offering them new opportunities to use their time in the military in ways that enhance their career prospects. Millennial men, and here when I say millennials, is we refer to those who came of age in the 2000s, so roughly who were born between 1980 and 1995. Millennial men who entered the military have grown up in an era dominated by neoliberal values, and they strive to use their time in the military productively, in accordance with those values. Thus, they seek assignments that provide them with opportunities for self-development. So self-development comes up over and over again in this paper, as well as wanting assignments that are easier and shorter in duration. While they actively take advantage of the opportunities that have been opened up by the reform process, they nevertheless experience their time in the military as providing, quote-unquote, much loss, little benefit, and are well aware that they could be using their time more productively. So this study examines how the neoliberal ethos instilled in South Korean millennials as they grew up in the 21st century guides their decisions and strategies regarding military service. How do they balance their own individual strivings with the demands placed on them by the nation? What significance do they attach to their service after it is completed? So here I'm going to talk a little bit about conscription citizenship and neoliberalism. Military service occupies a central place in the ideology of the modern nation state and is intrinsically linked to the status of what we call full or first-class citizenship. Conscription makes this connection explicit by requiring military service as a basic obligation of the citizen, and many late 20th century nation states relied on mass conscription to maintain their military strength. In recent decades, however, the use of mass conscription has declined, and militaries based on conscription are being replaced by ones made up of volunteer professionals. This transformation has been prompted by changing threat situations following the end of the Cold War and changes in technology that require smaller numbers of highly trained professionals rather than large numbers of temporary soldiers. The decline in the use of conscription also stems from its unpopularity due to the fundamental incompatibility between the practice of forced military enrollment and the democratic principle of individual rights and freedom. Along with other factors, the spread of neoliberalism has provided impetus toward ending conscription. In the United States, neoliberal economists of the Chicago School who came into prominence in the 1960s worked towards the termination of conscription. These neoliberal scholars theorized that, quote, the state's right to take life, end quote, was a fundamental political problem that could be understood by conceptualizing conscription as a form of tax and quantifying its cost to individuals. This project redefined the notion of freedom and the models of citizenship within the logic of cost-benefit analysis. Similarly, by encoding the social domain as a form of the economic domain, cost-benefit calculations and market criteria appeared not only in military politics, but also in decision-making processes within other social domains, such as the family and professional life. Although neoliberalism has contributed to the ending of conscription, it has not entirely broken the link between military service and citizenship. Rather, neoliberalism has restructured and polarized citizenship, redefining the military as, quote-unquote, the patriotic home of the deserving poor. For example, in the US, following the termination of conscription, marginalized people such as people of color, working class, and women have become a rapidly increasing proportion of those serving in the military. The voluntary military system has also globalized military service by drawing soldiers from poorer countries into the militaries of wealthier countries as a way to obtain citizenship. In this way, neoliberalism has played a critical role in marketizing and globalizing military service and citizenship. So in South Korea, the construction of the nation as an anti-communist polity during the military regimes of Park Chung-hee and Chun Doo-hwan, and the integration of military service into the organization of the industrial economy caused military culture to become deeply embedded in the daily working and social relations of South Korean society. All able-bodied South Korean men were required to serve in the nation's military, and the completion of military service became virtually a passport to male adult life. As military service became a marker necessary to properly embody South Korean masculinity, it became axiomatic that military makes true men. Military service has played a pivotal role in shaping the masculinity of contemporary South Korean men. During their military service, South Korean men internalized militarized masculine virtues such as physical strength and endurance, learned to be submissive to hierarchy, value the collective over the individual, and celebrate the sacrifice of the self for the nation. As a result, those who did their service in the comfortable military, such as Korean augmentation to the United States Army called Katyusha, struggled with guilt and the feeling that their less masculine assignments had exempted them from their fair share of sacrifice for the nation. Since the 1990s, however, with the combination of the growth of civil society in South Korea and the end of the Cold War elsewhere, there has been growing grassroots skepticism about the country's anti-communist national identity and its militarized modernity. Furthermore, the Asian financial crisis in 1997 transformed the Korean economy and accelerated globalization, which started unraveling the integration of military culture with economic and social organization. Following the crisis, the South Korean government embraced neoliberal policies, again that emphasizing economic competition, individual freedom, and meritocracy. First implemented in the economic sector, this neoliberal ethos generalized into other social sectors, including welfare, education, and social relations. So even though the military remains one of the least marketized sectors in South Korea, neoliberalism has nevertheless left its imprint on the South Korean military, as is shown by recent trends that require less time from conscripts, while also offering new benefits from the military service. For instance, starting in 2003, the military initiated a project of military human resource development to improve the competitiveness of military organization. Throughout this project, the military established basic infrastructure to promote, again, the self-development of soldiers by establishing more computer labs and libraries in the military, adopting an e-learning system to allow soldiers to take online courses at military up to 3 credit hours a semester, and delaying lights off time from 10 p.m. to midnight. Recently, the South Korean military initiated additional reforms to encourage soldiers to spend time more productively, which include giving additional special leave time of up to 18 days when a soldier passes a national licensing exam or language proficiency test, giving them credit hours related to the military that can be transferred when they return to school, and supporting tuition for online courses or test application fees. So the number of military personnel, when you look at 1967, it was about 600,000. It went up to 690,000 in 2000, but it's now projected in 2020 it will be around 500,000. Right now, in 2018, an army comprised of 464,000, and Navy, including Marine Corps, is 70,000, and Air Force is around 65,000. So in order to learn how South Korean millennial men plan for and experience their compulsory military service, we conducted in-depth interviews with 45 South Korean college students last year. In order to obtain a set of college students exhibiting diverse backgrounds, we selected universities from 3 different tiers. And when we say 3 different tiers, we based on a general kind of understanding of ranking system in Korea and in Seoul, that we divided them into 3 tiers. So first and second and third tier. And they were all attending universities in Seoul, and they completed their military service between 2013 and 2017. So they were hot off the press, so to say, when we interviewed them last year. And the semi-structured interviews lasted between 90 and 120 minutes. So these are the people we interviewed. The year of birth between 1990 and 1996. And university rankings, the first tier was about 20, and the second tier 11, and third tier 14. And military type varied. Army, auxiliary police, Air Force, Katyusha, Coast Guard, ROTC, auxiliary fireman, Army translator, and I didn't know what KIA meant, but I found out it's called Killed in Action, Recovery and Identification. options vary, as you can see. Anywhere from 21 months to 23 months at this point. And auxiliary police will stop recruiting from September 2023, and length of service of the regular Army also will be reduced to 18 months from November 2020. So already next year, students, no, not just students, any young men who go into the Army, their length will be reduced from 21 months to 18 months. So here, as you saw earlier, one of the questions was how do they plan to where to go, right? So although military service is compulsory for all South Korean men, there are a wide range of different assignments that vary considerably in how difficult or dangerous they are, and how much time they will take to complete, and how much the skills and context acquired during military service will be used after the military. And most of the participants, regardless of the ranking of the university, expressed a similar preference for assignments. That everybody wanted a little bit more comfortable positions and shorter commitment of time and closer to Seoul or to their hometown. So that covers everybody. And then it differs a little bit. First and second tier students, they really went for an assignment for their self-development, and they timed it so that it does not interfere with their academic school year as much as possible. And they also wanted to meet smarter people. So that's what they're going for. Third tier students they wanted, if nothing else, they wanted something interesting experience. But if nothing fails, they have no other option. Everybody at the top is Katusha, right? Everybody wants to go to Katusha because it's considered the best position to go to. So Jongmin, who was in the second tier university, who served in the Air Force, said, when it comes to military service, people have the same priorities. First, apply for Katusha. If that fails, try for the auxiliary police. And if that fails, apply for the Air Force. First, I applied for Katusha, but I wasn't chosen in the lottery. Katusha is the only branch. In the end, you have to go through a lottery system. So, and then there is given only one-time chance. If you are not selected at the first time, your chance is gone. You cannot apply again. So he applied, and then he didn't get in, and then he had some issues in the physical exam with the auxiliary police, so he couldn't go. And then he said, my friend in the Air Force told me that it was gentlemanly and progressive and had good facilities and few bad customs. So I went into the Air Force. So bad customs, irrationality came up again and again in the interview too. So for the elite students, as I said, they wanted a lot more personal time, conflicted as little as possible, enabled them to the context who might be useful for networking. So Daeyoung in first year Katusha said, I wanted my military service to be useful to my life rather than just wasting time. So I looked around and discovered that Katusha was the best. I would be able to speak English there. So English is very, very important for South Koreans. Everybody wanted to be good at English, and if Katusha offers that, they would like to go there. So I applied for Katusha. With academic calendar, Taejun was saying, in my school, major courses start from the second year. If I take some major courses in the first semester of the second year, it interrupts the flow of my study. I thought that going to military service after the first year and then starting to study in my major after that would be better. Third one, networking, is J1. Again, they are all first-tier students here, talking about the Air Force has requirements for its applicants. So in the Air Force, there might be less irrationality. I don't know how many of you understand Korean, but in the interview, 부조리 came up over and over again. And we had really hard time translating how to translate this 부조리. And in the end, irrationality was a term that we thought probably reflect the meaning the best. So irrationality, because many smart people applied for it, so I applied for the Air Force. So people who are in the first and second tier and third tier, again, as I said, their planning, their path do diverge. So not only they had the first and second tier universities, the students had access to more information about desirable positions, but they were also accomplished test takers. So of course, they can get into better positions than the third tier students. For third tier students, they were talking about how they were frustrated about less information was available to them. So one of them, Hongyi, was saying, although there are so many options, information is not easy to find. Most of my friends went to the regular army because they didn't know how to avoid it. I really didn't have much information about the military. So regular army comprised about 3/4 of the military, as you saw the number, right? The small 1/4 of the highly coveted kind of positions. But in the end, somebody has to go to regular army because that's where the majority of the people are. And many of third tier students ended up there. So one student in Hanyul was talking about how they wanted, but they couldn't get in. And he was saying, he wanted to go to the Air Force, but my application was rejected several times. After the first semester of my sophomore year, I thought it was getting too late. So I lowered my expectations and decided to go to the regular army. Almost all the students tried to go after the first year. So as I said earlier, because their major courses start from sophomore year on, they want to, not to interrupt that flow. And also the other thing is, many of South Korean college students, up until they go to the college, they have to study like you couldn't believe. The competition is like South Korea or China or Japan. I think that in East Asia, the competition is really, really fierce. And the other part is, unlike in the US, second chance is not available for South Koreans. So once you get in, that's it. That will follow your life until you die. So many students do try to do their best to get into the best school. And in order to do that, their life is consumed by study. So what happens is, once you get into college, the first year is spent not on studying, but on drinking, or dating, or things. So their life becomes much loose. And so they consider this first year as almost as a kind of a wasted year. And then they go to military, and then they come back and they continue to study. So from the numbers that we have collected, first tier, about 25% went to the regular army. Second tier, about 45%. And third tier students, about 50% went. So then how do they experience the neoliberalized kind of military and themselves as neoliberalized kind of a subject? And so for Katusha, auxiliary police, and Air Force, it's self-development is the most important part. And for the regular army, it's quote-unquote killing time. So the first one is very interesting because Abe was serving in Katusha, and he said it was like to go study abroad for 2 years because we worked in English and I could use English there. They also talked a lot about how good US-based food was. We may not agree with that, but they were talking a lot about the food as the best food that they can get. And the other one, Daniel, was also saying that personal time was so important to me during my military service period. Each time I had a vacation, I bought 6 to 7 books, including textbooks for my major, and planned to finish reading them in 2 to 3 months. My goal was to finish all the books that I bought before going out for the next vacation. So during breaks or personal time, I read the books and studied. So those who served in Katusha or auxiliary police and Air Force utilized their personal time for additional study. And interesting thing was, even those participants who were enrolled in third-tier universities but served in higher status units reported that they studied hard during their service due to the study encouraging environment. So that was also an interesting finding. So for those in regular army then, they reported they had very, very few opportunities to study. And it's because of exhausting manual labor, higher ranking soldiers harassing juniors who studied, and a generally discouraging environment for study. And this disadvantaged by this lack of time for self-development, and they feared that they might be left behind. So this quote we liked it a lot, and it said, when I was at the lowest rank, I was reading an English book one day, and I was scolded very harshly because those at the lowest rank should not read books. My superiors asked me, did you memorize the military songs? They asked me to sing a military song, and he could not remember because he didn't memorize it. So he thought I cannot study for 1 year because if I do, I'll be scolded. But then later, when I reached a higher rank, I couldn't study because I was too busy. I even worked at night. Sometimes they woke me up at daybreak and asked me to work. Finally, when I became the highest rank, even then, I was only able to finish 1 book, he said. I couldn't read much, and so this was interesting. There was neither personal space to read books, nor personal time to think deeply. So even though I planned to study English at first, I couldn't do it. And he served in the regular army. The other person who also served in the army said, I had planned to study, I had so many plans. I was like, I will do this and this every day after work. But when I went to the army, at first I had a good excuse because I had to do so many things when I was at the lowest rank. But actually, when I was promoted and I had some time, I still spent my time meaninglessly. And I went to the karaoke bar or watched TV, and I didn't study. Again, the kind of a regret and the kind of a sadness that they wasted their time came through from these interviews. So then when they are faced with this kind of situation, then how do they cope? It's killing time. That's what they're talking about. Because they could not spend their time productively, they killed time by watching TV, going to karaoke, playing sports, and playing video games. And an interesting thing was compared to those who served in the military before, the earlier cohorts, they knew they were wasting time. They knew they were killing time, but they did not really feel the resentment as much as those who were interviewed this time. And they were the ones they regretted and they resented, and the resentment came through the interviews. So even though the college students are neoliberal subjects, and also military also has become neoliberalized, military is nonetheless a coercive institution that subordinates soldiers' lives to the interests of the nation, and hierarchy and discipline rather than individualism and freedom dominate. And conscripts have no choice but to adjust to this hierarchical and disciplinary environment. So how do they manage? They develop what is called NUNCHI. And again, I don't know how many of you may understand this one, but NUNCHI literally says sense of I is the most important thing to learn in order to adapt to military life. NUNCHI requires being aware of and responding properly to the needs of social superiors, and it's not there. What's important is that before they were asked, so you need to develop this kind of sixth sense before your superiors ask you to go get water for me. You should know before that and bring water for your superior. That's how you show you develop the NUNCHI and following the orders without being asked. So that was the most important skills that they had to develop. Payne was saying when he was the lowest rank, that he woke up at 30 minutes before everybody else every day because he had to develop NUNCHI. And he had heard a lot about NUNCHI before he went to the military. And this part, even outside the military, in a company, newcomers have to go to work earlier than anyone else. I think the military is the same. If you have no NUNCHI and keep getting up late, then your superiors will let you know. And the term also used was pekul. It's a Korean pekul. We again translated it as wastage. So you're called pekul, then you're useless. And no one will want you to be in your unit or anything, so you are almost non-existent person. And soldiers are trying really hard to not to become pekul and not to be treated as a non-existent person here. So lastly, what we asked was, so what do you make sense of your experience and what kind of meanings do you attach? And three things came out. One was they really struggled with the notion of hierarchy and conformity. And again, the thing came up over and over again was feeling much loss and little benefit. However, they were also saying developing some independence, responsibility, and maturity. So they chafed at the hierarchy and loss of personal freedom of the military, and rather than feeling that they had been inducted into adult status, they felt belittled by their experience with military organization and culture. And both of them were talking about how military service turned them into, one of them talking about turning men into slaves who do whatever they are told to do. Military service makes people see NUNCHI, it makes them focus on what higher people want. So military organization makes people who are easily used by higher people. In short, the military is a process of making slaves. It's a very strong statement, and making Korean men into useful tools. And they saw very little benefit from their service, especially it was weighed against those 2 lost years and potential income. At this point, their monthly income is about 400,000. So it's only about a year ago, it was about $200 a month. So now it doubled, and now it's about $400 a month if you are up to the highest rank. So by the time you get discharged, they were saying that many of them said, well, we didn't have any savings, because if you get just $200 at the highest rank, and then you go out, if you have a girlfriend, if you date, you spend everything on one date, or if you go out to meet friends, if you go for a drink to a bar, you spend money and no savings at all. And they were talking about how that kind of monthly income, they should be able to make it even if they do just part-time work, if they were not in the military. So that's what they were talking about, how they saw little benefit from their service. And the part here, another term that came up over and over again was, in Korean word, it's called Seung-kyung. It's youth. And so they were lamenting on their precious 2 years has to be spent in the military without on their volition. That was the part that came up again and again. The other part was they did express resentment against women and Koreans with foreign nationalities who are not required to do military service. The part that was interesting was the second one. 2 years is not short, and it is in our prime time when we are 21 or 22. Just going made me feel left behind compared to my contemporaries, because my male contemporaries could get jobs and earn money. I was jealous of them. So imagine if you go into the college with your contemporaries, so female contemporaries, and after the first year you go into the military and you're gone for 2 years. But those 2 years is not just 2 years straight cut out of your academic calendar, because sometimes you have to wait. And the waiting period and considering coming back, oftentimes it's 3 years before you come back to the academic cycle again. By the time you come back, then your female contemporaries have already graduated. And they see that as the women do go out and either get jobs or doing other things, and they feel deprived for that. Even with all those negative comments, some of them did say about they learned, and they learned to become independent and responsible and mature. So the first one was interesting because he said that he didn't study at all before going to the military, but after the military he said, I study 2 weeks before the exam now, and I go to the library all the time, and I take my grades seriously. And the second one was saying that his personality changed in a way that he became more flexible, and he needs to weigh what other people want, what other people wanted to be done, and so he became more mature. So toward the end of our interviews, we asked about, what do you think about conscription? Should conscription end? And they, in the context, because when we were doing these interviews, that was 2018, was really the suddenly improved relationship between North and South. And it could eliminate the need for South Korea to maintain a large standing army. And also because of the end of Cold War and the disappearance of external threats, contributed directly to the termination of conscription in Western societies. So in our participants in our study, they expressed a range of opinions about continuing of the conscription system, reflecting their recent deep engagement with the military. And three patterns came up. One was conscription should be abolished. Second was conscription is a necessary evil. Third one was conscription is better than an all-volunteer military. So conscription should be abolished. These two comments said, I think that's what it should be changed to in the end. And the South Korean conscription system does not provide a proper reward to soldiers. As I said earlier, it is not worth it in terms of cost and benefits. The second one said, with the conscription system, it is impossible to get anyone to take responsibility when things go wrong. No one wants to be responsible. Everyone wants to get out of this shithole or make others do the shit job. There's no one with any interest in improving the military. Why do I have to do this kind of work when they hardly pay me? So it would be better to have a voluntary system with a better pay. People who think of it as a necessary evil, they think, it would be okay to implement a volunteer system, but only if there wasn't a problem with national security. Up until now, even though they didn't want to, they had to go. The reason was to protect the nation. Whether they liked it or not, they made the sacrifice. They served because they believed that conscription maintains national security. If a voluntary military system does not cause any problems for national security, then it's okay. So that's another body of opinions. And third one, I thought he really thought a lot about this before he said this. And it's very eloquently said here. I oppose adopting a volunteer system. First, we need to think about the class issue. If a volunteer system is adopted, those who don't need to serve because they have money, they will not go. And people who need money, they will go. Second, I think military service is a national duty. Rather than leaving such duty up to individual choice, I think it is better for all members of society to share the duty. National defense should not be the responsibility of a small group of people, but it should be shared by all members of the country. So in conclusion, what we found was military service provides little value to what we call millennial men. And the millennial generation does not feel much patriotism compared to the many, many generations of men beforehand who went through the same kind of experience. And the completion of military service no longer feels too connected to achieving adulthood. Because in South Korea right now, these who are in their early to mid-20s, when about a generation ago, I would say, it is a must. You must finish your education in college in 4 years or to 6 years if you must go to, if you fulfill your military service. What we found out this time, almost 95% of college students, regardless of male or female, they do not graduate in 4 years. Almost 90% take at least 1 year or even 2 years of taking time off to do an internship or to study abroad or to accumulate what is called a spec or your resume. So anybody who cannot get a job right away, right after the college, they would rather stay in the college rather than graduating. And it's like our graduate students, when you don't have a job, it's better to stay in the school than graduate. It's the same, similar kind of things. And the part that what defines as adulthood in South Korea, if we go for kind of markers, let's say education, getting jobs, getting married, having children, those markers have been pushed later and later. The age of getting married at this point in South Korea for females is around 32. For men, it is about 34 to 36, which is almost like 10 years later than about a generation ago. So it's quite a sea change kind of things that have been happening in Korea. So of course these students don't feel nothing close to adulthood that they are becoming adults. So completing the military service has nothing to do with becoming an adult here. For them, again, and I said this over and over again, routinized neoliberal calculations, trying to do better, trying to read more, trying to learn English more, even during the military service, has become their daily life. And even within this context, a significant gap existed between the affluent upper middle class and the lower middle class. So these 45 students, we have to define them as loosely, generally falling into middle class. And probably the first tier students would be more affluent middle class, and the third tier probably lower middle class. But they are, after all, attending universities within Seoul, which counts a big thing in Korea now. If you're attending a college in Seoul, you made it. So even if there's a big gap, we are still talking about middle class kids. The other part is this differential access to resources. It's not just ending in military. That influence their overall life chances. That's the reason why they wanted to go to units that they can meet people that will be useful to them in the future. So they struggle with aspects of the military such as absurdity and irrationality related to hierarchy that do not correspond to their neoliberal ideology. And the last thing is, somehow this neoliberal ideology converged in the military at this point, because the students who were brought up with this neoliberal ethos going into the army, military, and military itself is trying to better itself. And that's coming from, again, neoliberal ethos. So that's the kind of findings that we did from this research, and I can entertain your questions. But thank you for listening.
Professor, amongst the justifications or positive things, aspects that people often ascribe to mandatory conscription is a building of a common culture. And you have no mention of that here in this environment. Explain why.
Common culture is that they go through the same experience, right? So they do learn. The fact that I mentioned earlier about they learn to endure and they learn to obey the hierarchy. Those are all I would consider common culture. So although I didn't say as a common culture per se, it is embedded in it how they learn the parts that how to develop NUNCHI. That's common culture for them. You see, in order to survive, you have to develop that. And they consider that as camaraderie in a way, that a culture I would consider.
But here, you know, I mean, the archetypical example is the Marine Corps
Yeah.
here. Band of brothers.
Yes.
You're a Marine
Yes.
for life.
Yes. Yes.
I got no indication of that, where I would have expected some positive aspects.
I think Marine Corps probably is still at least this in Korean military, is one unit. Many of them do volunteers going. And they also said, and we had one, I think, that who had served, who talked about the particular or special brotherhood, I would say. And for these men we interviewed, I have to say that brotherhood per se was not the theme that came up. If anything that came up, the brotherhood that may help them later, okay? So rather than what we consider, let's say, two generations ago, the blood brothers and other kind of experiences that you go through in the military, go through the combat zones and what have you, that creates this kind of culture. We didn't get that from this cohort. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks very much for a great talk. I want to ask a question that extends beyond about your specific topic.
Yeah.
In this neoliberal society with a neoliberal military, is there room for conscientious objectors?
Okay, so thank you for asking that because we had about 2 pages about conscientious objectors, then we cut them out because we was worried that it would be too long. So conscientious objectors has become a hot topic, very, very hot topic in the millennium. Before, only those religious reasons, Jehovah's Witnesses, can say we cannot go to military. And if before that, as I said, if you don't go, you are facing imprisonment. Now, in 2018, both Supreme Court and Constitutional Court have ruled we have to accept conscientious objectors. The problem is, then what do we do with them? How do we treat them differently from other young men who have to go through? At this point, and which is still debated, and I don't think the issue is resolved, but the kind of a resolution that they came out with is, yes, we can consider any person, be they religious reason or not. You can apply for conscientious objection. But you have to serve twice the length of the military. So I said in 2020, the regular army, the length of service will go down to 18 months, right? Conscientious objectors will have to serve 36 months. And the place where they can serve also became a hot topic because at this point, the only place they can serve will be in prison facilities. So the problem, as you can see, is are they really treated fairly? So all the international organizations have been petitioning. In South Korea, I said earlier, all able-bodied young men have to go to the army. That's a lie. Lie in a sense. If you can afford to, be they politically powerful or very rich, many young men have been exempted. And that also became almost probably the most controversial topic for any top politicians in Korea about their son's military service, whether their son has served or not. And unfortunately, we have found out many of the top politicians' sons have not served. And they, again, created all kinds of ways, coming up with fake kind of, what is it? You are underweight. If you are severely underweight, you don't have to go. And, or if your eyesight is severely, damaged, then you don't have to be in active duty. So there are other places you can serve, not in active duty, but in other facilities. So those became a really hot topic, and I fear the fact that conscientious objector issue is becoming such a hot thing is because of the issue of distrust in South Korea. That's what makes it so hard to come to any kind of agreement at this point. Thank you for asking that. Just a second, there was one person over there in that comment. Yes.
Hello, I enjoyed the lecture. My question was, when you pointed out how the gap between contemporaries, how especially women would continue on, and by the time the men come back, they would be graduated. Do we know at all how that impacts the workforce in South Korea?
And right now, South Korean unemployment rate is pretty high, especially for youth unemployment. Because of that, what we describe almost as and I call that as a gender war going on, because of the competition between men and women about the employment issues and other issues too. Because of that, when we look at the employment rate between 25 to 30 in South Korea, the rate is almost the same between men and women. When it goes to 30 to 35, employment rate goes down sharply for women, and that stays like that until about 45 to 50. So it's called the M curve for women. And it has been the case for women when they get married and or they have children, they leave the labor force and da. That curve has been still applicable. It just was simply moved to the later ages now. So women do work, and women do, and I was talking about this at our lunch. Anything, if it is exam-based, women turn out to be the top test takers. So any kind of government civilian exams, if you were to just do the exam-based, you would have more than probably 75% women. As a result, so the part that I did talk about here is system called Veterans Extra Credit System was in place, and it was abolished about 20 years ago, about 1995. Until then, young men who served in the military was given extra points when they applied for civilian positions vis-a-vis women. And that became struck down by the Constitutional Court as unconstitutional. So those things again are going on in Korea because of that unemployment rate and all the things, and I cannot get into it right now, but one other thing that I'm writing about is what is going on as a genealogist of feminism in South Korea, how it has changed so far. And that, again, when I talk about that employment issue comes up over and over again. You had a question?
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. Really, think a lot about Israel.
Yes.
The change we've seen in the last 10 years or so.
Mhm.
All personal stories. But one of the things that was not mentioned as much, and I'm really curious about the Korean context, is the question of national memory and intergenerational relationships.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious is, as a millennial, I know the word not technically Uber, but apparently sounds like the millennials just don't feel the sense of
The patriotic kind of feeling.
thirsty, to defend the nation.
Ah,
There's no grandparents, their grandparents,
yeah.
started with your survival,
Yeah.
in Korean War,
Mhm.
and felt that's definitely
Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
So I'm wondering if you can explain, if you have a question about their families.
yeah. We haven't had a chance to talk to the parents of these returning students. But what they talked about when we asked them, what were your parents' attitudes about your going? Did their attitude change after you came out of the military? Did they respect you more because of that? So those questions were there. And what they were talking about was, first their parents, their first worry is, please come back not hurt. Come back in one piece was the worry that they had. And the second, they considered they were a little bit more mature after they finished. But the question one question we asked about, usually, in Korea that, and as I said, that military makes true men or real men. But in fact, in army or other branches, many of their chores actually are quite feminine work. Cooking, cleaning, washing, making up beds and things. And so we asked about that question too. So, you did all this kind of feminized kind of work during the military service. That learning, did that continue after you came out of the military? And unfortunately, many of them said no, they didn't continue. After that, they just forgot about it. So they do talk about things, but I don't think the kind of, any kind of conflicting kind of ideology or thinking, we did not hear much about that. But that part again, I can talk a little bit about the attitudes and generational gap regarding Korean unification. The generation, my generation, and the generation before me, my parents' generation, who went through the Korean War experience, they were the ones who left behind their loved ones in North Korea. They were the ones who went through the war experience. They were the ones who still consider U.S. as their blood ally, U.S. as their saviors, things. This generation, quite different in a sense. Either first, they don't care about the unification, because they don't know anybody. If nothing else, they are even worried about what kind of tax they will have to pay if the reunification happens. And they talked about Germany. They talked about how West Germans still have to pay for unified Germany, and they have to pay for the tax. And they were literally talking about, why do we have to pay for this reunified country? Why don't we just keep two countries separate and peacefully exist? That'll be the best for them. So those are again sentiments that we, listen to. You have a question?
Yeah, so thank you, that was a terrific talk. Your suggestion that the public unhappiness with conscription is really rooted in the economic neoliberalism of the late 90s.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there isn't a case to be made that there's a political liberalism that predates it that's at work here also. And I'm thinking about the resistance to Chunduan in the 1980s, and the extent to which, particularly the student generation, saw the military as a reflection of the corrupt and repressive political system.
Yeah.
So has the military already started to be seen
Yes.
as a clash of liberal values
Yes.
well before 97?
Yes, it has been going on. It has been going on. The kind of unraveling, like you said, has been going on. The thing that made, I would have to say, the late 1990s, and also the part that I didn't talk about is, you must know that Korea is the most connected country. Internet is unbelievable in Korea. So the fact that the first slide that I showed about those 3 incidents, those incidents happened in the past many, many times, but people didn't know about that. It was hushed and it was covered and nobody knew about it. Those things became instantly, and the mothers have become protectors of their children, of their sons. And they were the ones who made it like incredible inroads into the kind of unraveling of that. And so I agree with you, it didn't happen just like that. It happened in the 80s, the Chunduan period, and it became eroding in such a way. And then in 2000s with these things, it became much, much more apparent.